Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the American Dream in the Eyes of Immigrants podcast. And before we get into the episode, I have a huge announcement for the podcast. The podcast is now an officially two-time award-winning podcast. Yes, the podcast has actually won another award, and this time it was the Women Who Podcast Magazine Award. And the podcast won third place for the category Service to Others. And what was so cool about this award was actually that it was a panel of judges who actually voted and decided, the winners. And so there was first, second, and third place for each categories. And I submitted the podcast for Service of Others. And I submitted a little clip of episode with Sandy Dang, who had the nonprofit organization to help refugees. And so I submitted a clip of her episode, and yeah, the podcast won third place. So, oh my goodness, it's so crazy to say that, but yes, the American Dream in the Eyes of Immigrants podcast is officially a two-time award-winning podcast. And again, thank you so much for supporting. Thank you so much for being here week after week, and enjoy today's episode. Welcome to the American Dream in the Eyes of Immigrants podcast. I am your host, Heidy De La Cruz, and I am on the mission to change the narrative of immigration, one immigrant story at a time. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the American Dream in the Eyes of Immigrants podcast. I am your host, Heidy De La Cruz, and today I have a very special guest. I have Miss Doreen, and she is going to be talking about her amazing life that she has lived, living in 8 different countries and currently living in Mexico. So I'm excited to hear about that. But welcome, Miss Doreen, to the show. Thank you so much for being here today. How are you?
I'm well, Heidi, and thank you so much for having me on the show.
I am so excited to hear your incredible story. So, if you can just introduce yourself to the audience, who you are, what you currently do, and then you can get started with sharing about your childhood.
Okay, that's a lot. Okay, first question was, who am I? My name is Doreen Cumberford, and I live in San Miguel de Allende in Mexico. And I am retired, but I don't use retire because you have to be tired to retire. So
I like
I
that.
don't consider myself tired. I am in my 70s. I am a podcaster. I have the podcast called Nomadic Diaries, which is all about serving the expatriate and the digital nomad communities, helping them with global mobility, moving around the world, dealing with transitions, and making their lives simpler and more successful. So that's what I currently do. I also play pickleball a lot. So I have 2 P's in my life, podcasting and pickleball. As for
Love
growing
that.
up, I had a very interesting childhood. Well, I grew up in Scotland, and I can use my Scottish accent, but I can't keep it up for an hour. I have a bit of a Scottish accent, and it's sort of mid-Atlantic now. But I was an only child, and I lived in the city of Glasgow. We moved there when I was 6 years old from out in the country. And when we moved to Glasgow, my mother decided, this is in the 60s, my mother decided, oh, I think I want a big house and then I want to Airbnb. Well,
Mm.
it wasn't Airbnb back in those days. It was called having a lodger. And so she put ads in the local newspaper in Glasgow. And we had 2 lodgers who came and lived in this house with us for a couple of years. Now, they worked for the Russian consulate in Glasgow. And at the time, we weren't really worried about it or concerned about it, but they were KGB officers because anybody who did work out of Russia in those days, everybody was KGB. Wasn't a big deal. But I kind of was exposed to the world outside of Glasgow.
Mm.
And my dad read National Geographic magazines. We had stacks of them. At one time, my dad, when he was a child, when he was 10, he moved to the States for 3 years. It was during the Depression, and then they came back home 3 years later. And he always said that America was the most fun time in his life. So I grew up in a Scottish house with a sort of intercultural dad who still had a bit of American exceptionalism about him and sort of the glory days after the Second World War of America and the dream of living in America and being a migrant there.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was also part of the influence. But then I had the influence of all the National Geographic magazines compiled with the Russians who taught my mother how to cook Russian food. They didn't like her Scottish cooking.
Oh.
They taught me they didn't teach me how to ballet dance. My mother put me in ballet lessons and they helped me practice at night by listening to Russian composers and ballet dancing, pretend ballet dancing. But the other thing they did was teach my dad how to play chess, which was a lifelong passion of his until he was 96 years old. So my upbringing really programmed me for a life overseas, intercultural living, and with an appreciation of other cultures. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yes, it does. It sounds fascinating.
Does that
Awesome.
answer the question? What else would you like to know?
Oh, no, I'm just saying, like, that sounds fascinating, just how open you guys were to different cultures and things like that. I just feel like here in the United States, there's just a lot of people who are very closed to the exposure of different cultures and things like that. So I love hearing and talking to people about who have experienced so many different cultures and so much. And you learn so much from all the traveling and everything. So, how long were you in the United States for?
I moved to the United States in the 80s after I had lived by then I had lived in four countries. And I moved to the United States and I was there just over a decade. And then we moved abroad again to Japan and then ultimately to Saudi Arabia for 15 years.
Okay, so which state did you live in here?
I have lived when I first arrived, I arrived to Louisiana. And then later we moved to California. After we spent 20 years away, or not exactly, about 18 years away, we moved to Texas. But our home base, we tried to establish a home base in Washington state. And
Mm.
then we moved to Denver. So I've lived in 5 states, I think Washington, California, Texas, Colorado, and California.
And which one was your favorite?
Oh, I don't believe in favorites.
Okay.
Um, I think that every experience in life is given to us for a reason, and how we choose to use that experience is what teaches us the gift of where we are or the gift of the place that we're living in. So when I lived in Texas, for instance, I had come back from Saudi Arabia and I called Texas my most favorite international assignment.
Mm.
And the reason I call it that is because my husband was consulting there. We knew we wouldn't be staying there for very long. We knew we would be moving on and we were going to be going into retirement and we had lots of choices. We were
Yeah.
extremely privileged that we had choices. And the friends that I made, I joined an international women's club of oil accompanying spouses and oil filled wives and people who were um, not from Texas. So we had a walking group and a wine drinking group, and we had a museum visiting group, and we were from Canada, Ireland, Japan, Scotland. I said Canada. Couple of people. Yeah, there were a few people from the U.S. Oh, and South Africa, and so I felt like I was still outside the States in many ways. I had the privileges of living inside America, but I had the privilege of spending time with people who were from abroad.
Yeah.
So I would say that Texas was my most fun and successful international assignment.
Oh, okay, awesome. And if you can remember, or just whichever one comes to mind first, the first cultural shock that you experienced living in the US.
Oh gosh, I can. And it was traumatic.
Oh, no.
I had been living in Dubai. So I had lived in Africa as a diplomat and then back to London. And then I went as a single professional woman overseas, and I worked in Dubai. I met a fellow there and married him. And 90 days after we got married, we ended up in Louisiana, not by my choosing.
Mm.
And his family was from Mississippi. Now, I had lived in Africa, and I had friends who were African. I had friends who spoke all the different kinds of Zulu kind of languages.
Mhm.
And they were fabulous dancers, and they had amazing rhythm. And then I moved to Louisiana with this fellow, and it was pretty horrific the way I understood them to be treating African Americans.
Mm.
It was totally different. It was like, why do you treat people like this? And interestingly enough, my husband, when he was a little boy, moved from Japan because he was with a military family. His dad was stationed in Japan, and then he was transferred to Louisiana. And he did sort of the same thing that I did, tried to play with all the black kids, and was told that was not okay, and was chastised by the school and by the neighbors. And I had sort of the same reaction when I lived in Louisiana. It was pretty horrific. But other than that, I felt like it was just so foreign. The new family did not have very much respect for me as a migrant. We had very little shared experience. They felt like I had a very British accent at that time. And so I did speak rather like this because I had worked for the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. So my accent was different then. I didn't have the American twang that I have sometimes. And so they treated me like a snob, and I didn't think I was being a snob, and I didn't intend to present myself like that. But number one, I'm white. I started to dress more like Americans. They didn't show much respect to me, and so one of the ways that I sought to fight back was to learn how to cook Louisiana style, because they didn't think I could cook.
Oh, wow.
They thought that, I had very strange tastes. I loved French food at that time. When I served them what I considered pretty sophisticated meals, they kind of looked at it sideways. So I decided I needed to fight back, and I needed to claim that respect. And the way I did that was to learn to cook crawfish étouffée and gumbo and all those sorts of things. But, I'm white, And so they kind of accepted me, but they kind of treated me like the second class citizen.
Mm. I'm so sorry.
Well, that's fine. I got over it.
Okay. And so living there after that, you said I mean, you lived in 5 different states and then you left and then came back, right? That's what you mentioned. You had lived in Japan for a little bit and then
Yes,
Saudi
well,
Arabia. Mhm.
that was years later.
Yeah.
I stayed in Louisiana in that situation only for 4 years, and I met my current husband, and when I met him, I moved to California. And then from California, we were recruited by Saudi Aramco, which is an oil company, and we moved overseas to go to Japan and then Saudi Arabia. And then after that, we came back to the States and ultimately retired.
I'm tired. How tell us about your time in Japan. How was that?
I loved it. I loved the Jap. I have loved every country I've lived in. I have loved every state I have lived in. I have lived in under all sorts of circumstances. I was in Saudi Arabia during the Gulf War. I
Mhm.
lived in an apartment in Cameroon, West Africa, that was next to the presidential palace, where people would barge in with Kalashnikovs because I might be a threat to the president, and so they needed to guard my apartment.
Mhm.
I've lived in with different languages. I lived in Saudi Arabia back when it was just a little dumpy emirate with lots of sand and no glitz. So I've learned how to adapt.
Yeah.
And I've learned how to be very adaptive and flexible.
Hi, Heidi here. Thank you so much for listening and supporting my podcast, but most importantly, the mission. If you would like to further support this podcast, there are a few ways you can do that. You can sign up for the newsletter. You'll receive the episodes straight to your inbox every time they drop. The link is in the show notes and the show description. You can subscribe to the podcast YouTube channel. And lastly, you can donate money. That link is also in the show notes and show description. If you would like to sponsor an episode or promote your business on this show, send me an email at Heidi@HeidiDeLaCruz.com. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the episode.
To a point. And so Japan was difficult in many ways, but absolutely fabulous in others. And I think I would have loved to have been there longer, but we were on our way into Saudi, and so we were only there for just a little less than 2 years.
Okay. Okay. And so Saudi Arabia, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I wrote the book, Life in the Camel Lane, Embrace Your Adventure. And that was my first book. And in that book, I really talk about the vast differences in culture and how the first 5 years were very traumatic. Now, I had already lived in the Middle East.
Mm.
So I thought going back, oh, dead easy. I've got this. Well, I didn't have it. And so the first 5 years were pretty traumatic. There was quite a lot of adaptation, but during that 5 years, we had the bombing of Khobar Towers. We
Mm.
had 9/11, and then ultimately, 3 years later, we had a lot of terrorism, and we had the beginning of the Iraq War. And so that was a period of time over about those 5 to 7 years where there was a moderate amount of what I would call low-grade trauma.
Yeah.
And, but the next 5 years were all about, well, how do we live with trauma? How do we grow through this? How do we develop resilience? How do you build grit? How do you raise a child in that environment? Um, and it was all a great big experiment. And I studied breathing. I studied Hindu breathing. I studied all sorts of spiritual paths. I dabbled in all sorts of art and made lots and lots of scrapbooks for my family. I volunteered a lot. And so looking back on it, it was just a really rich experience, the second 5 year period. And by 10 years, I didn't want to leave. The last
Mm.
5 years were wonderful, even though we were still in the midst of the Gulf War and there were F-16s flying over my house twice a day. Even though I had by that time grown some grit and raised up some resilience inside of me. And so I was able to thrive in that environment.
Wow. And I don't know why I didn't ask this before, but how many languages do you speak since you've been all over the world?
Oh, maybe a little bit of English, that's all.
Got it.
I was sent overseas to Cameroon because I was pretty good with French.
Okay.
And I was ultimately fluent in French. Hardly speak any now, but it's very handy for me here in Mexico. Um,
Oh, really?
yeah, but I just use Franglish, French, English, and Mexican and Spanish, and I mix them up. Um, and then I learned some Arabic, but only enough for conversation. And sadly, when I went back to Saudi Arabia, everyone there wanted to speak English.
Oh.
It was a source of pride for the Arabs that they spoke English, and even the Pakistanis and the Indians and the Filipinos and all the other nationalities who
Mhm.
serviced us and who take care of us, and even the gardeners would speak Urdu and another language and Arabic and English. It was really embarrassing, and I was lazy.
Oh, no.
So I didn't learn a lot of Arabic, but I did learn some conversational Japanese when I was in Japan. And now I'm learning my fifth or sixth language, and it's Spanish. And I have not, in all honesty, I've been applying myself to my podcast and not Spanish as much as I should. However, I am able to make myself understood in most situations.
Okay, yeah, just, continue practicing it and I'm sure it will come.
Do you
And
speak Spanish?
I do, sí, yo hablo español.
Ah, see, I thought you might. Yeah.
Yes.
Lucky
Yeah.
girl. Lucky.
Thanks. I know I actually have to practice or speak more Spanish. My husband is also Dominican and we tend to default to English when we
Uh-huh.
speak. And so when I do like talk to my parents or like my grandma, I can feel like, oh my gosh, how do I say this? How do I say that? And I can express
Yes.
myself better in English. And I'm like, okay, I need to speak more Spanish so I don't want to lose it. So
Yes.
yeah. So talk to us. I want to get to your podcast, but first I want to talk about Mexico. So you retire
Yes.
in Mexico. How did that come about? Why did you guys just decide Mexico? Yeah, tell us all about it.
Well, when we came back from Saudi Arabia, we thought we would be living in the Pacific Northwest, but after a year of living up there and then commuting between there and Texas, I was really suffering from seasonal affective disorder, SAD, because I moved from the desert. It was 100 plus degrees, like for 9 months of the year.
Mm,
And I moved to one of the wettest parts of the world in the Pacific Northwest. And it was too big an adjustment. And I think that I did not give my body and myself enough valuation or credit for the adjustment that it took. So we were looking for another place to live, and Denver is very sunny, and my husband had family there. So we thought, oh, we'll try Denver, but Denver was freezing cold. And
mm,
during this period of time, we discovered something called pet sitting. And we had people who came from all over the world who came to sit our dog in our house. And I looked at my husband one day and I said, could we do that? And he said, I think we could. So for about 6 years, we did quite a lot of pet sitting. And at this point, we've done 60 pet sits with over 60 dogs and 64 cats or something. And
Wow.
so we did that in 10 countries. And we traveled a lot for that period of our retirement. And then many of our pets had been down here. So we came down to Mexico. We discovered pickleball here. We loved the pet sitting here. We came back again and again and again. And ultimately, we got stuck here during COVID. And we were
Oh,
stuck here for 7 months in 2020. And then we came back for another 4 months in 21. And then we came back again in 2022 and we found this little house and and the house bought us basically. And then we went back to Denver and said, our family really didn't need us. We didn't see them nearly as often as we had anticipated. When you've moved away and you have different experiences that are not shared, it's very, very difficult. I've just done 30 podcasts on the subject of repatriation, of going home. And so now we have a library on the subject of repatriation. And it was just difficult to live in the US, having lived somewhere else where we felt we had more freedom. We felt like we had much more freedom in Saudi Arabia, even although I couldn't drive, even although I had to wear an abaya, even although all the rules were in place. We just felt like Mexico would be a sort of, for us, it's a compromise. We're still close to the US.
yeah.
We can see our family if and when they need us fairly within 24 hours. We can use our English, but we're also challenged by learning Spanish. We love the Spanish culture. We've been very welcomed here. We find that we can live this quasi expatriate life and continue in an experience of shared belonging that we didn't have in the US.
Hmm. Okay, interesting. And I want to hear about this pet sitting business that I like. I don't have any pets, so I that's not something that I would use, but I know a lot of people have pets. So people will want you to come and stay in their house so you can take care of their pets.
Yes, but we only choose very, very special houses and special people. There is a recipe. We've done it so much and we've done it
Yeah.
for so long now that we have a recipe and we have requirements because we can. And,
Yeah.
gosh, I sound so spoiled. Um, um, we, it has to be the right people and the right pets in the right place.
Okay.
Now we do it like, we went back to Scotland recently and I wanted
Mhm.
to see some of my relatives, my cousins, and we were able to find a house literally around the corner from my cousins, so we didn't have to live with them and we could visit them.
Mm,
And it was
nice.
very lovely and we had a great dog to take care of and we walked the dog every day and it was wonderful.
Yeah, and on average, like, how many days would, like, a gig take?
We've done a pet sit for as long as I think 3 months. And
Wow,
we've done one as short as a week, but now our perfect sweet spot is a month.
a month. Okay, and usually, are they traveling, or just, like, work, or what is usually the situation that they'll need a pet sitter for that period of time?
Well, most people that we sit for now are either traveling. Well, the last people we sat for, they were traveling for to celebrate the sale of a business. And so
Okay.
they went to France for 3 weeks and took about 20 people with them and rented a big chateau. And we got to live in their grand house. We had fields and we had two dogs, and we were way out in the countryside in part of England. So we love it because we're very adaptable.
Mm-hmm.
And we've learned how to sort of fit ourselves into all situations. You know, there's a great quote. It says, "The world accommodates you for fitting in, but only rewards you for standing out."
Mm.
And so it's not in the making life easy or comfortable that we have these wins. It's in growing the grit to be uncomfortable and in tight situations and handling it anyway. And so we've just gotten really good at fitting into other people's schedule, their pet's schedule, learning all the different appliances that are in a house and all the different types of plugs and where the light switches are. Um, how to operate. Oh my goodness, I had a 30-minute lesson on how to operate this very complex coffee maker at the last place. And, you know, at our age, that keeps us young because it keeps our brain growing and developing and stretching.
Yeah. Wow, that is so fascinating. But then also, another experience and another way to travel and see the world and things like that. But that's awesome. Let's talk about your podcast. So tell us the name of your podcast, what it's about, and why did you start the podcast?
Well, I've been an expatriate for 50 years. And so I understand a bit about this packing up your life, moving across the world,
Hmm.
unpacking your life. Now, when we pack up, people think that if you put your body on a plane and you pack your suitcases or your container, because some people have that much stuff and travel with it, and companies sometimes ship a container, right? And we think that when all that shows up at the other end, that you've moved. But in actual fact, that's not true. Um, you've got to move your health and your well-being. You've got to move your relationships. You've got to move your finances and your fiscal situation. You're moving your career, and often it's a career that's taking you there. Or you're moving for love, which is, again, back to relationships. And it takes a while to unpack all these things. And we think, oh, I'm going to get off a plane. They're going to give me a real estate agent. We're going to choose a place to live and we're just going to move in and it's going to be dead easy. And we're not, and we don't consider the time, the energy, the focus, nor the attention that it requires to unpack your invisible side of yourself. We think once our bodies have gotten there that we're fine. Well, I've learned over the years that that's not necessarily the case. And so I've wanted to do a podcast for years and I finally did it. I wish I'd started it 10 years ago, but I finally figured it out. It was a question of AI and Doreen and the idea aligning all at the same time. And now that there is an alignment, I'm just so thrilled and happy. So the podcast is basically I interview authors, I interview researchers, and I interview the experts who really are the people who study intercultural relationships. Maybe they're storytellers. Maybe they have, like yesterday, I interviewed someone who he packages and sells a program for expatriates and migrants living overseas or people who move a lot for insurance. And so it was the first time I've ever
Mm.
interviewed an insurance agent and had to make it fun and exciting. Right?
Yeah, yeah,
So I love it. I love the conversations that I get to have, and
yeah.
it keeps my mind and heart in the expat zone, in the international lane, or in what I call it's the global hearted side of me that I can keep it alive
Mm.
and serve my listeners by providing them information and experiences and stories and research on all of the situations like that they're experiencing and all the challenges they're experiencing.
Yeah. Yeah, it is fascinating talking to so many different people and listening to their story, their experience and everything like how I am listening to you right now. I'm just so
Yes.
fascinated with the life that you have lived. My goodness. And so how long ago did you start your podcast?
I started it in this is 24. What year are we at? Okay. I started it in October 2023,
Okay.
and I worked really hard. I have 130 episodes.
Wow, that is amazing. And okay, you mentioned, okay, we are in 2024. We're recording this in 2024. However, this episode will air in 2025.
2025. Yay!
Yeah, so
Yay for
that's
2025.
yes, we're recording in the future. No, but that's awesome. That's a lot because you mentioned that you wish you had started it years ago and that you wanted to start it for years and it took a while to actually get started, which is actually very common for people who want to start a podcast. I actually have I do help people launch their podcast. And that is a very common thing that like, oh, I've been thinking about this for years and I just haven't started. And even for myself, like I wanted to start this podcast before 2020 and I didn't launch it until 2022. So it's very common to just like sit on
Yeah,
that wanting,
yeah.
yeah, wanting to launch, but finally have able to launch it. But that's amazing because also the percentage of people who actually do start a podcast but don't make it past the 10th episode is actually really high as well. It's like over
Yes, it is.
90%. So
Yes.
really that's really exciting that you have so many episodes already.
Yes, well, I worked very hard at it, and we've done, like I said, we did a special library recently of 30 podcasts on the subject of repatriation. And so there are definite subject zones in that my listeners want information to. And one of the hardest times, one of the hardest transitions is moving back home. And
Hmm.
so I love to, I'm writing a book right now called Unsettled, and it's navigating home after living abroad. Um,
Wow, okay.
I am also really interested in things like raising third culture kids, which is what I did when I was living overseas. My daughter grew up in Saudi Arabia and Japan. So I would say that my listeners are interested in belonging, how to arrive, how to all the personal development topics that support a person in living the life of their dreams. But, when you live a big life of your dreams and you have to layer over it visas, languages,
Yeah.
culture shock, it's a lot. And so I find that this is very, very satisfying and that we provide an amazing service, hopefully, to digital nomads, global nomads, digital, whatever kind of nomads, and to expatriates.
So actually I was gonna ask you, besides your podcast, what is another project that you're working on? But you mentioned you're writing a book, and I definitely want to read the first book you mentioned that you wrote. Sounds very interesting. So once your current book is out and published, you gotta let me know so we can have you back on the show to talk about it.
Okay, I'd love to come back. I'd love to come back if you think is something your listeners would like to hear.
Yeah, for sure. And so, okay, so you're writing a book, you're working on the podcast. Is there anything else that you're working on or anything else that you are thinking like, what's next for Doreen? Pretty much is what I'm trying to ask.
Yes. Well, what's next really is getting the book finished and getting more episodes out on the podcast on the subject of belonging, because I think that the biggest problem, the biggest problem is actually in settling in and enjoying the process and growing into a new country or into a new culture. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
And it's not something that's dead obvious. And we all do it at different ways. And so, sometimes we over adapt at first. Sometimes we try to fit in and then we give ourselves up. Sometimes we lose our way. Um, it's just a very, very challenging time of life to be managing transitions, especially in 2024 when we've had so much to think about. There's been so much noise with elections, and now we have AI. And I think that it's very, very important that we all get very, very focused in on our lives so that we
Yeah.
can be more of service.
Yeah. Definitely. I definitely agree. Well, Doreen, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for sharing your amazing life with me and my audience. And if there is a piece of advice that you could give to someone who may be either thinking about moving to a new country or have recently moved to a new country, what is that piece of advice that you would give them?
That's interesting. Well, someone once said fitting in is a short-term strategy. And we can all arrive and try to fit in and make ourselves belong. But standing out pays off in the long run. So be true to yourself. Be exactly who you came here to be. Be willing and be willing to move, but move. If you have the inclination to go, it will be the best thing you ever did in your life in terms of your personal growth. It will be the most education that you could possibly,
Mm.
I think, get. Don't you agree?
Yeah. Yeah. There was a quote. Oh, so my husband and I are currently watching the show Ted Lasso, and there was one of the owner of the football club in the show. She said, "Travel is the best type of a form of education, don't you think?" And I was like, "Oh, that was good. Travel is the
Yes.
best
Yeah.
form of education."
It
I love
is.
that.
It totally is.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with that. Well, thank you, Doreen. If people would like to get connected with you and find out more information about you, your projects, your podcasts, where can they reach you?
I will send you the links if you would like to put them in the show notes. I can be reached on LinkedIn and Instagram right now. And I am at www.doreencumberford.com. But you can contact me through Nomadic Diaries. Nomadic Diaries is a podcast, and we're on Spotify, Apple, anywhere you receive your Overcast, anywhere you receive your podcasts. Just contact me on the contact form there. And I would love to help any of your listeners in any of their navigating of migration or moving overseas, because like you said, it's the best education we could ever hope for. Thank you so much for letting me guest on your podcast. I've loved the conversation.
No, thank you so much. And yes, I will include all your links in the show notes and in the show descriptions. And thank you so much for this.
You're welcome. And listeners, don't forget to rate and review Heidi's podcast.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for listening to Mommy Podcast.